Sabrina from LCA Spotlight, and this is our guest feature where we dig deeper into accessibility topics and your questions. Our featured guest today is Elizabeth Pawlicki, and Elizabeth is a senior customer advocacy manager at Articulate, and she's also a certified professional in accessibility core competencies. Elizabeth, could you please tell us more about your role at Articulate and also your journey into accessibility?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So my role now is within our product marketing team. And what's very interesting about it is that I spend most of my time speaking to our customers and learning about how they use Articulate products to solve problems at their organization. So what kind of courses are they making? What are they building with either Storyline or with Rise 360? And I got into accessibility as part of my previous role on the customer training team because accessibility is certainly not a trend, but we're definitely hearing more about it in the e-learning space than we used to. It used to be something that really lived within federal government agencies and was focused on a lot there. And what's wonderful is that that's expanding, as you know, and we hear about accessibility all over the e-learning space. And so that was really a response to customer demand of what does Articulate know or suggest, or what are you doing in the accessibility realm? And so that's how I started down that path. And for people who aren't familiar with the CPACC or the CPAC certification that you mentioned earlier, it's a hard test to take. I have a lot of test anxiety, but if you are looking to get certified or just expand your knowledge on accessibility, I can't recommend it enough. Loved going through that experience.
Thank you for that, because, I myself have been thinking, about that certification. And like you said, I think it's a wonderful way to learn more and just be certified as an expert in that field. Thank you so much for your introduction. And now that we know you better, we have some questions we sourced from the community, and I'd like to start off with the first one. What are some best practices someone new to accessibility should keep in mind when they're designing in Storyline 360? Or in other words, what should they stop doing right now, or what could they do differently?
If you're brand new to accessibility, honestly, the best thing you can do is just start. You'll make mistakes, and that's okay. I always say if you've been doing e-learning for a while, or even if you're new, the first course you ever make probably isn't your favorite example, right? It's probably not the number one thing that you'd share in your portfolio. Maybe it kind of makes you cringe when you look back on it. And that might be true if you're getting started with accessibility too, but just start. That's honestly the best thing you can do. There's lots of good resources out there, whether they are training webinars or books or ebooks, lots of good stuff out there. But if there's something that I would say stop doing, my recommendation is to stop building an entire course and then think, okay, now how do I make this accessible? That's going to happen if you're going back and trying to fix previous courses that you've already built or maybe are already deployed to learners. But if you're getting started moving forward, start incorporating accessibility practices at what we always talk about is like the far left-hand side of the process, or in the design phase. So start incorporating your accessibility processes as soon as you can in your e-learning process in the design phase, because that's going to make it a lot easier for you moving forward.
Yeah, that is so true, right? It's not like a bolt-on where you put it on at the end. You need to start from the beginning. Are there any resources? Somebody's new to accessibility, can they go there and look up for resources?
Yes, we have a whole series called All About Accessibility in the eLearning Heroes community forum, which is community.articulate.com. I think it's always important to have a basic level of understanding of really what accessibility is too, before you start digging into the tools and trying to figure out how do I do this in the tool. So having understanding about accessibility, disabilities, inclusive design, all those kinds of things before you start building is really important.
Yeah, that is such a great point. I totally agree with you. So let's move on to our next question. So what kinds of accessibility related features does Storyline support? Or is there like a quick run through or demo you could give us?
Yeah, absolutely. I can share my screen and share some features with you. While I'm getting my screen going, I'll mention I was just in a webinar this past week put on by one of the I think ATD chapters, and they had a presenter talking about accessibility. And one of the things he said was, no matter what tool you're using, the responsibility is on you as the author to make your course accessible, no matter what tool you're using. And that's absolutely true. There are definitely features in every e-learning authoring tool that can help you. Storyline, no different there. And so let's talk about what some of those accessibility specific features are that maybe somebody wasn't aware of or hasn't been using. And the first of those, I think that I would point out, what we tend to think of as a strictly accessibility feature, is this focus order. So on my home tab in the focus order, let me move it over to the correct screen here. A focus order is something that the screen reader, a screen reader user, needs to determine how they should navigate the slide with their keyboard and what the screen reader should be saying. So focus order in combination with alternate text, which we'll talk about next, is one of the key accessibility features in Storyline. Most of the time, I think you'll find that you end up creating a custom focus order. And if you're not familiar with focus order and screen readers and navigating with a keyboard, what happens when someone's navigating via keyboard is they use the tab key or they use the up and down keys and the enter key to navigate websites, e-learning courses, any kind of content that they need to go through. And the focus order determines, well, where should the tab key or the arrow key, if we're navigating with our tab key through interactive content, where does it need to go? What's the order for the screen reader to read that content? So that's the main thing. If you're thinking screen readers, keyboard users, that you need to have a good focus order set up. The default focus order is almost never the right focus order because it goes from left to right, top to bottom, kind of depends on how you put content on your slide. So always look at that when you think, I'm completed with this slide, it's done, it's ready to go. Check out your focus order and just make sure that as someone tabs through, that's going to make sense.
So I have a quick question on that.
Sure.
So usually when on the focus order, on that little table, you see that the layers come first before the base layer, the additional layers. Is there a reason why it's programmed like that?
Generally, you see it that way because that is the order that people created their slide in. But layers and states and different slides and Storyline are tricky to determine in depending on what happens on those layers, right? So there's nothing on the base layer where someone could actually interact with the content on tab 2 right now. They're not going to get there until, in this case, they click on the button, the laptop click and reveal for tab 2. So even though that's there, the layers are there at the top, I'm guessing that the person who created this is just an example I pulled from our eLearning Heroes community, tested this out and found that it worked best when the layers were at the top of the screen. But it really depends on the course that you're making, on the slide that you're making, and what content is on that slide. This is a pretty simple click and reveal where the layers just have images and text on top of them. So putting these layers here at the top is okay because it's not going to interfere with the base layer.
Okay, so if somebody tabs, it still goes to the base layer and it will not go to the additional layers first.
Exactly. So even if they're tabbing, it's going to go through the base layer. And then once they select something to open a new layer, then they can move through that layer with their tab key and their arrow keys. While we're talking about focus order, one thing that I'll point out if you're new to testing with screen readers and keyboards is keeping in mind that tabbing through content, so using your tab key, is for interactive items. So if you don't see something on this focus order and you're wondering where it is, I know it's on my slide, why is this not there? It's probably because it's not interactive content. It's a text box or some text-based content that you have on the slide. And the way that a user navigates that kind of content with their keyboard is with the arrow keys. So people ask that question a lot in the eLearning Heroes community. I'm tabbing and I'm not hearing the text that's on the screen. And that's because tabbing moves on to the next interactive object.
That is really good to know. When you talk about interactive objects, you're talking buttons and links and things like that, which open another layer.
Exactly. So anything interactive, great point. Buttons could be a marker, for example, something that's going to happen if you press your enter key or click on it with your mouse. Those are the items that the tab key is going to move through versus just text-based content. That's where someone would use the arrow keys.
So are there any other features people should know as beginners in addition to the focus order?
Yes, absolutely. I would learn about whenever you have an image and you right-click on it, or if you right-click on it down here in your timeline, you'll find an accessibility tab on there. So on this particular image, this is a great example. This slide is just a click and reveal where it opens up additional layers on this computer. But this background image here, where we have the little wooden kind of stick man on there and the cactus that's blurred out, that's really just for visual interest. It's not providing any sort of function. You can't click on it. It doesn't do anything. It gives no function or meaning on this particular slide. And what that matters for is the alternative text or alt text. Is this object visible to accessibility tools? So notice on this image, that's turned off or it's unchecked. So a screen reader is just going to skip over this image. It won't read anything. There's nothing for it to say. On the flip side, if this image did do something, or if this image was illustrating a point on this slide, we would want to have that checked, and we would want our alt text to be descriptive, concise, but descriptive of what this image is. Why is it on this slide? Basically, what's the purpose of this image in your alt text? But for this one, we can leave it turned off.
In other words, we just have alt text for any content that is descriptive or adds to the meaning of that slide.
Yeah, and I think there are some other instances where you'll end up using alt text, and maybe we'll talk about that later as we go through some of your questions. But always consider alt text. This is a place where sometimes people get a little bit tripped up when they're first learning. But just think, does this item, does whatever's on my screen provide any meaning? Does it provide any context? So another image we have on here is actually of this computer. Well, this isn't a slide telling me how to use this computer, right? So really, it's just the content within the computer itself that matters. So this is probably another image where it's going to be turned off because the computer really doesn't have anything to do with the slide content. Two more things as far as accessibility features that you asked about. And this is something that I think everybody should be using, which are the text styles in Storyline. They're very helpful for screen reader users because if you think about, if you're not a screen reader user, when you go to a website and you can see that some text is larger, big heading type text, and then you have maybe a little bit of smaller text and then a bulleted list below that, all of that is designed not just because it looks nice, right? But it's to give you a sense of structure and organization to the content that you're reading. And the same thing is true for screen readers, but you have to use text styles for the screen reader user to know this is a heading, this is just normal text, this is a hyperlink, and so on. And so in Storyline, we have headings 1 through 4, hyperlink text, normal text, and then you can also add your own custom styles if you want to. These are beneficial whether or not you are attempting to make accessible content. I hope you are, but even if you're not, this is helpful because if you ever go and change your fonts in your course or you change the design theme with the fonts in there, all of those are going to be applied based on what you have set for heading 1, heading 2, and so on. So text style is very important. And then the last item, this is something that if you are a sighted user or a non-keyboard user, you may never see, but it's the focus order indicator. So in your file, you may have noticed sometime, and we can take a look at this preview here. We'll see how fast it takes to load. But when you are navigating via tab, hopefully you can see this yellow and black outline on here.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's your focus order indicator. That's telling you this is where the keyboard is currently focused. So if I want to open layer 3 here, then I would hit enter. And now I am on tab 3 in this, and I can continue to tab through this slide. And you'll always find that there is a back to top. We only have one slide here, so there's nowhere to go. But if we have multiple slides in a course, you'll generally see within your player a back to top button here so that the user can start that slide over again and get back to the top of the screen. Kind of like if you were using your mouse and scrolled back up and started over.
I do see 2 colors there, then the yellow and a black. And is there a reason for that?
There is. So when you have your slide, and I'll share if there's a way to share a link with this afterwards about the focus order indicator, I'll share some more information on the focus indicator. But it's helpful to have both of those colors in there, both a dark color and a light color, because you never know what it's going to be focused on your slide and what color that might be. So what if I had been highlighting over something that was bright yellow? In that case, the yellow indicator would not have been helpful to me if I were a user who maybe had limited vision, but the black indicator would have been helpful. And vice versa, if I'm highlighting over or tabbing over content that has a black background, I'm going to need that yellow color.
Provides the right color contrast based on whether you have a light or a dark background.
Exactly.
Excellent. So while I have you sharing your screen, our next question is, how do we make states accessible? So in other words, if you have a screen reader user who can't really see that they've visited, say, a button, how do they know that the button's been visited if they go back to it?
This is a great question, and also something that's really easy to forget to do, because a lot of times when we're building our states, we build a state, we test to make sure that it works when we are clicking on it, and then we move on from there. But every state actually does have an alt text format for it. So if I go into, for example, my hover state on this number 1 and right click on it, it does have alt text, and that is specific to this particular state. Right now, it's just showing what's in the object, but I would want to make sure that I set up my states for all of these set up my alt text for all the different states that I have on this particular object. And this is an area where Storyline has made some huge improvements over the past 3 or 4 years, being able to adjust this alt text and make sure that it's going to work properly with the screen reader.
So do you recommend adding it to the hover state too? Because, somebody with a keyboard cannot really hover over it.
That's a great point. So it's up to you if you wanted to do it for a hover state. Hover states generally, as you mentioned, they tend to be for mouse users, tend to also be for sighted users to provide a difference between the normal state and selected, for example, or letting you know where your cursor is. I like to just do it for all of the states so that I have it and then can duplicate them. I never know what I'm going to end up doing with the states of my object. The last thing I'll mention on hover state, since you talked about it not really being a feature that works well for keyboard users, is just a word of caution, is we used to see a lot of examples where something happened on the screen when a user hovered over an item, right? So maybe text would show up like a tooltip or something. That's really something that you want to avoid, because hover states are for mouse users, not for keyboard users.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because sometimes while designing, we tend to forget, it's just feels like an exciting part to add to your design to have something under hover, and you tend to forget that not all your learners might be able to access that information. So that's really great to know. And then we have a question on time-based media. Very often when we design, we have content try to sync to the audio, and then we have content which appears and disappears off the screen. In this case, is there a way to provide an alternate version with Storyline that is available to assistive devices, or what would be a best practice here?
One good practice, if you wanted to do something like that, people don't always know this, but you do have, I'm going to make my Storyline slide a little bit smaller here. You have all of this gray space on the side, and this is actually still working space. So from an authoring perspective, you can have something that lives over here and then maybe goes on a motion path onto the screen. That tends to be something people do a lot. But the other thing you can do with this gray space is put text boxes on there that will be read by a screen reader. And the reason that I say that is because if someone, we still see a lot of courses where there's audio narration. Maybe a screen reader user is using your audio narration, but maybe your audio narration is interfering with their screen reader. So I would do two things if you have something like that where there's audio and content coming on and off of the screen. First, make sure that people have a way to turn the audio off. Don't force them to listen to the audio that's on the slide because, again, if someone is using a screen reader, that may conflict with what their screen reader is trying to tell them. And then two, if that audio then is synced to content that's coming on and off the screen, assume that maybe your screen reader users have turned that audio off, and so they need a different way to get that content. So I would put it over here in your gray space. It's still part of your published output, and a screen reader will read that stuff no problem if it's in a text box here off of the slide. And it really depends on what's happening on the screen. Sometimes things are just animating on and off, and they're pictures and maybe they're decorative, don't provide a lot of context for what's going on. With anything, I always consider why you have this sort of interaction. Is it something you just think is fun, or is it required and necessary for the matter at hand?
That's really interesting. So we would have the same content, but instead of in an audio form, we would have it as text.
Yeah. And people say to me a lot, well, I want to make sure that we have audio narration on the slide because we know that there are some people who need to hear the content. And that's true. Some people prefer to hear the content, but people who need to hear the content and not see the content because they cannot see or have limited visibility, those folks are using a screen reader. So they don't need your audio. They're already getting that audio in some other format.
Talking about timed interactions, now sometimes, we have gamified courses or where there's like a time limit. Maybe there's a scavenger hunt and you need to find everything within 2 minutes. What is the best practice here? Because now we are forcing, not all learners probably are comfortable with having a timed interaction where it's probably stressful and you're probably not being able to find everything under 2 minutes. So what do you recommend?
Sure. I'll stop sharing. I don't have an example for this one, but I feel really strongly about this one, about not using timed interactions unless it's required by some sort of law, regulation. Otherwise, I know, for example, that when you take the bar exam or some kind of accounting exam or even the exam for the CPAC certification, that there is a maximum amount of time that you get for those exams. But students who are taking those exams also have the opportunity to request some sort of accommodation, whether it's additional time because they have a learning disability or if they need to take the exam in some other format because of technological limitations. They do have the opportunity to ask for an accommodation on those kinds of tasks or those kinds of exams. If you're providing a timer just for fun, scavenger hunts are a really good example. I mean, I would say just don't. The thing is that for some people, and you mentioned this, Sabrina, that then it's stressful, right, to have the timer on the screen. And I always think, well, what's the goal of our e-learning course? It's to get somebody to learn, hopefully. And if what they're focused on is a timer counting down on the screen, they're focused on the timer, not on what they're supposed to be learning. And maybe if it's just a fun experience, you create 2 versions of the course, one with the timer and one without, and let the learner choose. But I wouldn't force all learners to go through an interaction that has a timer just for the sake of it having a timer and mimicking some kind of scavenger hunt, because you're right, that can be really, really stressful. And I know we all love those game-like courses, and you can still have a creative game-like experience, but without a timer in it.
So in terms of storyline, do you think another way would be to maybe, have some kind of a variable where they could turn it off, or maybe have like a box in the beginning or some text saying, would you like to turn the timer off? Is that possible in storyline?
Yeah, absolutely. Variables let you do almost anything, right? There's a lot of options once you introduce variables into your storyline course. So that's a great example. You could also just duplicate the slides and remove any timer variable that you have on there, because generally what's happening is someone is seeing on the screen timer counting down. Something's going to happen when the timeline reaches a certain amount of time or something like that. Pretty easy to take the same interactive experience and just remove that variable or that trigger that you might have on that particular slide.
Okay, that's really good to know. My next question is about templates. It'd be beneficial for somebody to set up a template with accessibility features from the start. Worse, we discussed before, having to come to the end. Of course, there are some things you have to do at the end, like the testing and any other QA things you need to do. But are there any features we could start from the beginning and just create a template?
I get asked this question a lot. I used to get asked this question in every single accessibility webinar. And I would love to see someone create an accessible template, and I would probably find a way to break it immediately. Because a lot of times the first things we think of for accessibility are, okay, I need to make this work for users who are blind or users who are deaf. So sure, I could make you a slide or even an entire course where the focus order is set. And I have a reminder on the screen for you to include closed captions, for example, and the alt text is all perfect for the image. But as soon as you add a button or a new image or change the font or change the color palette, there's a possibility, a good chance really, that you broke this template, right? One of the nice things about Storyline is the creative freedom that you have. But if I provide you with a slide and you have the ability to make any changes on there, I can't force you to add alt text for your images, and I can't force you to use a font that's readable, right? If you change the entire font to some sort of very difficult to read cursive type font, then now it's not really an accessible course anymore. So I think there are some good starting points out there. We've been working on our own internal demo course and making sure that it passes accessibility standards and having it go through external testing. But again, if I provided that to you, as soon as you change something, then we're really starting over from we need to check everything because you may have changed this one thing.
That's true. So there's really no way to kind of certify that it's accessible. Or maybe an alternate would be to have like a checklist on your template to make sure that you're achieving everything as you go. Does Storyline have any built-in tools that will flag accessibility issues right now?
Not right now. It is something that we've talked about a lot internally. I'm not on our engineering team, but it is something we've talked a lot about in our accessibility internal team. There's so many moving pieces to a Storyline course, figuratively and literally often, that I'm not sure that there's a way we could confidently flag every single issue. Checking a Storyline file is very different than checking a PowerPoint slide. And I know that there are other authoring tools out there that have accessibility checkers built in. And trust me, I have tested them. And the ones that I have tested have missed what I think are pretty obvious things, like, is the target size of this button big enough? Or is the color contrast meeting guidelines? And typically they don't have any way of telling you, hey, you have way too much text on this particular screen and it could be problematic for somebody with a reading disability or a cognitive disability. You mentioned a checklist, and we are working on a checklist that we'll probably release later on this year towards the end of the year for things that you should consider when creating a course, whether that's in Storyline or whatever your preferred authoring tool is. Just things to keep in mind as you're developing, because as we've been talking about, this isn't something that should happen at the end. So as I build, what are things that I need to consider for things like text and images and multimedia and keeping all those things in mind? So we don't have that checklist yet, but it is something that we're working on.
That's exciting. Look forward to the checklist. Are there any new accessibility features coming up in Storyline we should be excited about?
Yes. Yeah, always. We are working on some accessible feedback layers for quiz questions. So those feedback layers are going to meet color contrast and focus guidelines by default. And we're also working on the ability to generate transcripts. So right now we have closed captions, but generally people have to put a transcript in the notes or somewhere else on the slide. But the ability to generate some synchronized video transcripts from closed captions. And then finally, for those folks who are exporting their entire course as a video, as an MP4 file, we are working on the ability to have closed captions for that as well. And all of that is on our public-facing roadmap. So you can see all of that on that roadmap there too. Before I forget, because I know when you and I had been emailing about this session, I know that there were some questions about drag and drop. So should we talk about that?
Sure, definitely. I know that's like a hot topic on everybody's mind, right? Like you can't do drag and drop.
Yeah, so we'll talk about the hot topic of the drag and drop. And maybe I shouldn't end this on a controversial opinion, but I do think I have maybe kind of a controversial take on drag and drop, and I know there will be people who don't like this answer. Most of the drag and drops I see are drag and drops for the sake of being a drag and drop, and they don't generally have anything to do with what it is the learner is going to be doing on the job, right? So it's not saying you are learning to work with this machine and grasp and move things around on this particular machine. And here's where maybe you can change your thought process on that. There's lots of things you can do if you're making drag and drops just for the sake of having that interaction. Think about picking from maybe a series of drop-down menus, or even just doing simple multiple choice or pick many types of questions. The interesting thing about drag and drops and e-learning, which is different, I think, from drag and drops and websites, is that WCAG and those web content guidelines are really all we have to go on, right? These are the guidelines for e-learning. But e-learning has some differences from using a website. At 2021 DevLearn, the best of DevLearn as selected by peers, people who were there, was a drag and drop interaction. And the user needed to build a series of tacos. And it was a beautiful course. It worked really well. And in the job that this person had created this client, this course for this client, the end users were the people working in a taco shop, right? So part of their job in person is that they were required to have the tactile ability to be able to do things like reach, grab, use tongs, spoons, knives, pick up ingredients, literally pick up ingredients and drag them across on the kitchen shelf and put them into the tortillas. And the course was amazing. It was beautiful work and had huge significant impact on reduction of waste for this particular client. And so in that case, I think, does a drag and drop work here? Because on the job, the users who would also be taking that course needed to have the ability to grip and move and physically drag and drop things. I think that particular case is the exception rather than the rule. But one of our community managers here did create an accessible drag and drop interaction. It's available on eLearning Heroes community. It works if you want to use your mouse. It also works if you would prefer to use the keyboard and tab to the objects and select them, and then they move along a motion path is what's happening behind the screen. So my very long-winded answer here is first is to consider if the reason you're making a drag and drop is because the task in real life that you're trying to teach this person will be doing something that physically involves dragging and dropping. And if not, then do something else. But if so, then you can always watch the tutorial that we have or download that example, and you can still make it keyboard navigable. So I will say the built-in drag and drop within Storyline is not keyboard navigable, but it is possible to build something that works both with drop targets and with navigating via your keyboard.
And I agree. I think not to just have it for the sake of having drag and drops, you're really teaching someone. And I will go look at the link and, maybe add to the, end of this call when we publish it. So,
Perfect.
Yeah. And thank you for bringing that up. I did have that as one of my questions. So if people would like to connect with you, where could they find you?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm always happy to talk about accessibility with anyone. And if you want, you can also just email me. My email is very easy. It's elizabeth@articulate.com. So if you have questions about what's coming or anything that we talked about during this discussion, I'm always happy to talk about accessibility. And even if I don't know the answer to your question, I can usually find someone who does.
Oh, thank you so much. And you've been really supportive in the LCA community too, answering questions. And when I were talking about the Accessibility Book Club, would you like to talk about it?
Yeah, so we're starting a book club. We haven't had one yet, right? But we've created the LinkedIn group, and I think it's called E-Learning Accessibility Book Club, and we can share that in the LCA Spotlight links too. But if anyone would like to join, it's not going to be specific to books about e-learning and accessibility, but it will be things like understanding inclusive design and understanding what we mean when we talk about accessibility and inclusive design and how all of that impacts our work as e-learning creators.
And then the book club meets once a month?
Yeah, so I think we'll meet once a month. That'll be our goal, and we won't read a whole book every single month because I know that's a lot to ask. I think we'll just do a couple of chapters every month, depending on the length of the book, and hopefully people can join. I know we get people from all over the world, but we'll definitely record those as well, and would love to have people join the group on LinkedIn and participate in the book club.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it. And I would really like to thank you for your time answering all these questions from the LCA Spotlight community members. You're such a wonderful resource. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great doing this, and happy to help if you need anything else moving forward.
Thank you.